All right. And to say welcome again, whether you're watching live or checking back in on the recording, and a special welcome to Roger, who's our speaker. Roger's been coaching and writing on type since the 1980s, and his books include one of my favorite titles, I'm Not Crazy, I'm Just Not You. And he's also developed his own psychometric, the Pearman Personality Integrator. You can find a link to, if you're in the UK, a link to SciSoft, who are the UK license holders for that, in the chat. Um, Roger, thank you for being with us, and over to you for the next hour.
Thank you so much. And thanks to each of you for being willing to dedicate some time to this material. I am always deeply appreciative that folks want to get into conversation and explore the kinds of things that are of interest to me around type and how we might together create an effective use of type in all the ways in which we use type in our personal and professional lives. I'm going to ask for some thumbs up if you see a full screen of EQ, type, and well-being and effectiveness. All right, thank you very much. Around 2002, the International Research Award granted by the American Psychological Association, the research award was given to a team of um, cross-cultural researchers, mostly U.S., UK, and I think a researcher in France was a part of the team, in which they had done a multi-year study on what were the contributors to individual well-being. And when they did that work, they came back and said, having looked at all kinds of variables, the variable that had the most power, and of course, this will not be a surprise to any of you, was in fact the quality of relationships individuals had. The relationship studies that they did showed that if you feel as though you are aligned and connected, appreciated, and respected by other individuals, it didn't have to be, teams of people who felt that way about you, but that you had some relationships where that level of connectivity existed, the relationship to your health was extremely high. You may know that Isabel Myers started her own health studies in 1961 as she would follow up on data that was collected from folks taking Form F that was associated with the Educational Testing Service in the United States, where all people going to graduate school, law school, or med school also took Form F. She would take those contacts and follow up with people for nearly a decade to find out how their health was. She wanted to find out what is the relationship between type patterns and type dynamics and health conditions. So she had that curiosity, and some of that work is embedded in step three. Not all of it is embedded in step three, but nonetheless, my point being, inquiring minds have come to the same conclusion now for many, many decades that the quality of our relationships has a direct impact on our overall well-being and our capacity to choose, if you will, the right behaviors in order to be more effective in the work we do. Fast forward, the whole arena of emotional intelligence has invited us to look at what are the aspects of relationship building that we might want to pay attention to. Now, I get asked by lots of people, and I cannot get this screen to move. Why that is, I do not know. Give me a second. All right, we're going to have a little interruption here. It will not, the slide will not move, and that's very annoying. Having tested this, Jerry. Okay, hold on a second. All right, let me come at this another way. This is not my preferred way to do this, but looks like I'm not going to have much choice. I was letting earlier on before you got on, we were testing the system, and I said there had been an upgrade, and the upgrade had just made my life miserable in managing these PowerPoint presentations. So I see what it did. It took my clicks and made something I didn't intend. All right, I apologize for that, but the test drive earlier worked, and now for some reason, technology wants to be a problem for us. All right, you can see, I hope, the Emily Dickinson quote. And it's a quote that's near and dear to my heart because in one small hour, as we attempt to share information with one another, I've set the expectation when I do these presentations that what I hope happens is that just as she said about her poetry, that it ignites the imagination and lights the slow fuse of the possible. So I try to have realistic expectations about what we can accomplish within a 55-minute period of time. We're going to take a look at these particular items. And by the way, I'm not one to read what you yourself can read. You can see there are a couple of points to set the stage that I want to make sure you understand, if you will, intellectually where I'm coming from when I look at these particular subjects and these topics. And I'm going to have you do two small breakout group conversations here in just a little bit. In 1994, I was on the research team to assist with the revision of the MBTI when the IRT analysis was being done. And on that team, we all had different subjects, and I chose emotional intelligence as the area to look at the linkages between type and emotional intelligence as it was emerging at that time. Over these years, I've come to some observations about research that's published with the label emotional intelligence, or research that's published about emotions and the influence of emotions on our choices and our decisions. And it seems to me that just about everybody who studies emotional intelligence will agree that foundational to emotional intelligence is that there is information in emotions. And the emotional intelligent individuals, or if you will, those of us who have higher or moderate or less, have varying degrees of capabilities of being able to decipher the information in emotions. I want to point out that if we take a look at the most popular frame, which is what Daniel Goleman has presented, that in fact, that framework has not been in any way supported by substantial research. His four boxes are merely a heuristic way to organize information. When I look at the way things get organized in the field of emotional intelligence, we seem to be all over the place. There are all kinds of researchers who organize the information in all kinds of different ways. I think we're still on the front edge of understanding emotional intelligence. We're going to have to find a coherent framework that enables us to blend the brilliant insights of Daniel Kahneman and System 1, System 2 thinking, the brilliant work that neurologists are doing, neuroscientists are doing, as it relates to looking at emotions and how emotions impact the way the brain works and impacts the way in which we operate in the world. Further, not only in my research in looking at the different levels of effectiveness of individuals, it is very clear that being agile is a key factor to individuals being more effective in whatever they're attempting to do, as well as overall they make better health choices. Now, agility is an interesting thing. In some ways, Myers gave us a typological definition of agility when she wrote that type development is knowing which function to use and using it. So, to be able to use a function, you have to have some awareness of it and to know how it can be utilized in your life. So, I would just make those general observations. In addition, I would tell you that as I read as much information as I can find on emotions, especially the biology and neurology of emotions, we do see that there are different brain patterns that are associated with different emotions. In fact, you've seen the color wheel of emotion. You've seen, I'm sure, a whole variety of frameworks. But what neurologists will tell us is there are probably 7 to 9 core emotions, and the way they blend gets us the 64 other moods and feelings that get put out there that you see on various color wheels of emotions. But from a neurological perspective, what you will find is this general agreement that there are 7, depending on the researcher, 8 or 9 emotions, which are absolutely key to human beings. And the way in which those emotions get activated are qualitatively different. And in my experience, typology is a critical part of what contributes to which emotions get triggered and for what reasons. What we also know is that, based on a whole variety of other studies, is that emotions really are about our own psychic feedback system. And part of our challenge is to learn to decipher that feedback and make use of it in very productive and meaningful ways. As I've looked at it over the years, it strikes me that this way of thinking about the research is critical in making sense of all the varying researchers who are trying to give us some insight into the nature of emotional intelligence. And again, we come to the core, it seems to me, of all models, which is how we decipher the information in emotions. There are lots of other layers of things that ultimately impact behavior. And we have to be clear that it is in behavior where we're able to see how we've integrated our understanding of our emotions and other emotions. We know that cultural overlays influencing values and beliefs and learning patterns are a part of what feeds our behavior. And it's my observation that type dynamics are a key part of how it influences our perceptions and our reactions. Myers made a remarkable statement in Gifts Differing when she said, the goal of type development is to help make our perceptions more clear and our judgments more sound. And I would suggest to you that is a type of intelligence. All measures of intelligence look at how we perceive and how we problem solve, which is how we judge and organize things. And so it is my view that our perceptions and our analysis or problem solving is greatly influenced by type, which influences our behavior. Now, over the years, I've tried to produce some pragmatic ways of accessing this kind of information. A whole series of booklets, the most popular one being Emotions and Health, which takes a look at those basic emotions and how we can utilize them to help us make healthier choices. And then, of course, the People Skills Handbook, which was a scan of all research on those skills that contribute to the field of understanding emotional intelligence and overall health and well-being and effectiveness. But the key part of it is action tips to help individuals be more effective. You might be familiar with my previous work in the Introduction to Type and Emotional Intelligence. And what's important to this, from my perspective, is that um, at that time, when all that data was gathered, primarily from the database of the Center for Creative Leadership, which has the largest database of managers and executives on the planet, we were able to look at all the kinds of behaviors by type that would, in fact, help us understand how we perceive and act on emotions as the information was, again, organized at that time. As the years have gone on, I've come around to a couple of other observations and thoughts to share with you. One is that when we look at our type patterns and we look at our mental functions, especially, we need to be sensitive to the fact that we at times are consciously choosing certain things. There are times when we adaptively respond by virtue of the pressure and tension in the circumstance. And then there are times when the unconscious just takes care of it for us because our system has been overwhelmed by certain circumstances and our psyche says, I know I'm going to have to do certain things
And
in this matter.
and
Now,
as David's
in,
mentioned, if you would be kind enough to put your personality type into your name, then that will.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sure what we're getting there. Some interference from some other event. Carry on and let's hope for the best. I'm not quite sure what to do about that.
Yeah, in the recent Science magazine, this study was published, which I thought was quite captivating. The study of 1,000 starting at the time kids in 1972 up until most recently, when the research was published, the researchers said the predictor of success was the ability to understand and if necessary, override feelings and impulses. In other words, self-management, self-control, dealing with your emotions in constructive ways was the single largest contributor to overall success and overall, if you will, well-being. Now, again, what I'm going to share and where it comes from, I just want you to know that in looking at the CCL database, I was able to look at 79 independent variables. And in looking at those differences, those variables included, if you will, multi-rater tools. There were three multi-rater tools, so we could actually see how each of the types were being seen through different lenses. We had a meta-analysis of the factors related to emotional intelligence that fed a variety of pieces that I've put out there in the world and that you may have seen. The most recent piece, though, is having looked at all of the problems with self-report tools and looking at what are the skills that really do overwhelmingly contribute to effectiveness and well-being, resulted in the creation of a tool I call the EQ Accelerator, which asks people not only how effective do you think you are at something, how important is this particular skill to your overall well-being. And it's been put on a 7-point scale on both in terms of effectiveness and importance because the most recent research on self-report data, while we know self-report data, when I'm saying I'm good at something and not so good at something, is slightly skewed depending on the study you look at, a 7-point scale has been shown to have greater accuracy if the anchor points are well defined. So through a series of studies and looking at what does a well-defined 1 mean versus a well-defined 7, that is used in this tool. And if any of you decide you'd like to look at it just for your own interest, just email me and I'll send you a link and you can do it yourself. But here are the 4 domains that we typically see in the EQ world and the skills associated with those domains. And what happens in this particular tool is the individual gets a sense of what they said about themselves, and what they said is really important to their effectiveness and well-being. What's interesting is our accuracy on rating of importance is spectacularly accurate. When we are asked, do I think being particularly open is important? And we say, yes, really, really important. And we talk to the people around you and ask, how important is openness? They'll say, really, really important. So we have a great deal of accuracy around importance in the way we report things. We know there's some skew in effectiveness. However, the 7-point scale, as I mentioned earlier, has been shown to have greater accuracy. So it follows that if I say something is really important and I'm saying I'm so effective at that, and as you see here highlighted, impulse control with a gap of 3, that has the greatest gap, and that by necessity must be the area of, if you will, personal development and growth. And what the tool does is that it then provides action tips for what you do here. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do to sort of test out some of these skills in your own sense of self. You have a handout that gives you all 4 domains, but what I'm going to ask you to do is in just a minute, I'm going to ask you to look just at self-awareness and self-regulation. So if you will, I want you to take a look at in the handout that you will have available, and we'll put it in the chat space if you need it again. Quickly scan the self-awareness and quickly scan the self-regulation skills. And I'm going to ask you in a small group, and we're going to put you in random groups to identify the 1 or 2 that you think would be most important for you to develop to enhance your EQ effectiveness in these particular arenas. So I know there's a lot there, but I know you're also fast readers. So don't overinterpret the definitions. Just quickly find the 1 or 2 that you think you need to develop. Ask yourself and share in the group, what does your type and how does your type perhaps impact those skills as you think about yourself and you think about how these skills are playing out in your life. And in particular, if you can get to it, what might be the various functions or particular function that you think might need further growth and development in order to do those skills well. So I'm giving you an opportunity. Identify the 1 or 2 that you really want to develop more. Talk about how your type may play into that. And if you can, what particular type function might be most useful for you to exercise in order to be effective here. Now I'm going to put you, Jerry's going to put you in random groups of, let's see, Jerry, will 3 do 2,
Big
4?
groups, I think.
All right. I should have also said appoint somebody as your reporter. So I'm just simply going to call out a name. And if you're in that group and you want to say something about your discussion, the insight perhaps that you had, please do. So the first group I have here is the Doris, Isabel, Valerie group. So one of you tell us about your conversation.
We volunteered Doris to do that after she left.
Okay, Doris.
Yeah, beauty. Yeah, beauty. So after yeah, we agreed that the Scottish accent is one of the most beautiful of them all. We were talking and very much in agreement about how age makes a difference and how, as we're all feeling types, some extroverted, some introverted, in varying levels or varying, dominant preferences. Age makes a difference. And when we were younger, we would have had a lot more boxes to tick, but over time, let's say the importance shifts of where we place the effort of emotionally managing ourselves and others and caring about certain things. So I think Isabel put it very beautifully when she said it's not so much not caring anymore, but realizing that maybe some things are not my problem to fix. and I've definitely resonated with that. I think I'll
Thank
leave
you.
it there. Anything
I'm
to
a-
add, ladies?
Thank you for that summary, Doris, having been voluntold. All right, the Cash, Joe, Sandra, Tanya group. Do you have a reporter?
No, we don't, but I'll jump in. You know, fools do what where others rush in. I'm not sure of that quote, but here I go. Well, one of the commonalities of the four of us was the last two letters in our type code, F and P. And I'll just, self-actualization, independence, uh, and I'm blanking here on some of the other self-actualization, impulse control. Those were some of the kind of common themes that we saw. A couple of us saw that because the our tertiary function is thinking, that bringing in more thinking could help with some of those issues. And I'll just open it up to the other three and say, what would you add? I'm just summarizing here.
Great job, Cash. Nothing to add. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right.
No, agree. Great summary. The other one was self-confidence, I think, as I said about that. But I think there
Yes.
was a theme with us around the bringing that T, using that T function to sort of improve effectiveness and confidence and assurance of ourselves. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, thank you for that sharing. And I really appreciated your hypothesis about how FP may be playing into some of those choices. So, our last group, you know who you are. Who's going to talk?
I was waiting to see if anybody else jumped in, but they didn't, so I'll go for it. So we all had different type references actually. There wasn't any single letter that was in common across us. I think, and tell me if I'm, if the two people, please tell me if I'm wrong, but our type references did come out quite well in the things that we chose. So I've got ITV preferences. I chose, what did I choose? Authenticity and mindfulness. I talked about. And I think for me, it was interesting. It's interesting to get myself to a place where I actually think those are worthwhile, which says something within itself, I think. And I know I chose two from the self-awareness and none from the self-regulation, which again may relate to the introversion side of things. My two colleagues both had preferences for extroversion and for feeling. We had impulse control was coming out as one for someone of the NFP preferences. We had resilience coming out. And please remind me, everybody else, what other things came out, because I can't remember. If I'd known I was going to take notes, I'd have taken notes, but sadly I didn't. So what were the other things that came out?
As I say, part of it, I think, with the extroversion is being able to get to slowing down and not making those sudden impulse controls. And as we get older, we seem to be able to do that a little bit easier as time goes on.
Interesting.
Anything to add, Viv?
Yeah, I think there's something for me about independence and managing my ability to tune into others' feelings, emotions, my empathy as an ENFP, and dial that down and realize that it's important. You can't always be empathizing with people. You sometimes need to step back and act much more independently, and I've learned to do that.
Interesting. You know, it's fascinating, isn't it, as we start talking, and I do the earlier comment about age and experience, I think does make a huge difference in what we might prioritize today versus what we might have prioritized 20 years ago. And I sometimes wonder if the larger environmental dynamics that are at play also cause us to adjust some of the things that we consider particularly important. I wanted to show you, and I already had it up there and didn't realize it. Let's see if this will do. I'm going to show you some gap patterns. Remember, in this particular data gathering process, I had people identifying what was really important to them, what they felt was critical for their well-being and their effectiveness, and then how they rated themselves about how in fact they demonstrate the behavior. Now, these data come from a relatively small number. I think our N at the time, based on the groups that we've had that where we used both the tool and a type measure, um, we're only right around 270 people. So I view these data as some initial trends that we might be attentive to. And the reason why the data is important to me is it may indicate likely and probable areas for a particular type that I might be working with to be attentive to. Now, let's take ISTJ. You will notice there are four of the scales listed, and the scales, the gaps, the highest gaps, the biggest gaps are the congruence has to do with self-awareness, the group savvy with other awareness, self-disclosure with self-management, influencing others with other management. I want you to see how that pattern plays on the screen. So you would see this and say, well, with the data we have so far, ISTJs are reporting bigger gaps with congruence in terms of their self-awareness, bigger gaps with group savvy in terms of other awareness, bigger gaps in self-disclosure around self-management and influencing others, a bigger gap there in terms of the other engagement piece. So this, as you see, is the STs. Here we have the SFs. Just take a moment, and I know you can download the PowerPoint and you can see that data. And I'm just curious, as you look at this, is there anything surprising to you around the SF categories? Feel free to make a comment if there's something that you are quizzical about. We have more NFs here, as almost always in type-related programs. So I'll let this stay up for just a minute and find out from you, does this resonate in any way, or does it seem sort of not true for your experience?
Can you elaborate what you mean with perspective taking? Is it what I think it is? As in putting ourselves in the other person's shoes?
Okay, if you will, you have on the handout the definition that's used in this particular scale around
Sorry.
taken. That's okay. I want to be consistent with the information you have in front of you. Um, so it is intended to tap into um, this sense in which we manage our perspectives on things and adjust our perspectives on things. And finally, NTs. I deal with a lot of ENTPs and ENTJs in the management world, and INTJs who are in high-level management roles that usually wind up in some sort of coaching relationship with me. And I would say these initial trends are fairly true to type.
Yeah, I mean, speaking with INTJ preferences myself, I think that's pretty much on the button. And it also, as you have experience with ENTPs and ENTJs in coaching, I would say I've certainly seen that these in work with them.
In a 360, this is just a side story. In a 360 that we use, there is a scale related to how you read and adjust your responses to other people's behavior. And the executive ENTP gave himself a 5, and 17 raters gave him a 1 on that scale. And in talking with him, he was quite perplexed that there was such a different view in terms of what he believed he was paying attention to and what others believed he was paying attention to. And I suspect that it had a lot to do with the perception of him not being patient and not controlling his own impulses. We'll see how that data unfolds as in the next couple of years. Now, all of you know of this gap. And just because let's say a person gets their data and they look at it, whatever the EQ tool is, um, just because they know, gosh, I need to enhance my patience, or I need to become a more active listener, or I need to pay more attention to how and what I'm choosing to do to influence others. That gap is sometimes pretty significant in terms of getting people to get across that gap. And it's hard work in many, many cases. We all know that awareness is the first step. We have to, your hand raised, Cash, what would you like to ask?
And I'm sorry, I'm kind of going back to, the detail around the gaps. I find it interesting that congruence is number one for both ESFPs like me and INTJs. What are your thoughts on that? And not to make too much of that, but just
Well,
yeah, your thoughts. Yeah,
yeah, keeping in mind that we're looking at some initial data.
right.
I think it comes back to self-awareness.
Okay.
If I'm not particularly self-aware, when I look at a definition and the behaviors associated with congruence, I'm likely to say this is a new area for me to probe. I haven't really thought about it that much.
Hmm.
And my hunch would be that's where that plays.
Okay. Thanks.
So in bridging the gap, these are the kinds of things that I lean into in the processes where I try to stick with what we know for sure. And this is what GRASP stands for, is that bridging the gap most of the time is gradual. It's going to take repetition on repeating some behaviors and getting oneself in a space to talk oneself into trying out a new behavior. It takes reinforcement. What's the reward? If I go through this work to develop more active listening or to do the deep dive to find out about how congruent I am with the choices I make, it takes active engagement and very specific stimulus management. That's the exterior and internal environment that we're in. Our internal environment, that critical voice we have, can get in the way of developing a new behavior, especially if that critical voice is trying to keep us from expending the energy it takes to develop a new behavior. And then, of course, practice and making sure that we try out a new behavior and get feedback on that behavior. So, in my mind, if we're going to bring tools to help people pay attention to, especially their EQ related skills, we need to be mindful that it isn't necessarily going to be easy work. We also need to be mindful that there are two kinds of horizons we might keep in mind. Horizontal development is the enriching of skills. Vertical development is being able to change one's psychological understanding to become more systems oriented, if you will, and more attentive to the complexity of life and the behavioral range that we might have available for us. And so sometimes as coaches, we have to be satisfied that a horizontal shift is a good thing. Now, just as a couple of summary points I want to make is that I do believe that type development and EQ effectiveness are interdependent factors. There's a substantial amount of evidence, in my view, that as we enable people to become more self-aware of their type and to hold all of the dimensions of their type, we elevate the opportunity for them to exercise some skills they may not have paid attention to before. We need to remember that knowing isn't the same thing as developing, though it's a very essential first step. I do think inner work is critical, and finding ways to help people enhance that inner work is tied to feedback and the growth that occurs as a result of seeing how their behavior impacts other people. And I like to remind folks that type is very predictable. However, it's not as absolutely inevitable. And as always, we need to make time to be open to questions and explore different things. I would share with each of you again, if you want to just find out from the EQ Accelerator what your patterns might be, email me, and I'll be happy to send you a link to do it so you can see for yourself how that gap might be. I would ask for feedback if you do that and let me know because I want to see the type patterns and how the type patterns play out, and which I'll ultimately make available to all of us who are into the utilization of type in the work that we do. And I am going to put my email address in the chat space. This is okay, chat space work. There you go. And I'll be happy to respond. I'll also happily respond to any questions you have from today's presentation. We have 5 minutes left for general questions or observations or thoughts that you have, and I'm all ears.
Ash had a question in the chat about the acronym GRASP and just the 6 words that it
Gradual, repetition, reinforcement, active engagement, stimulus control, and practice. And of the ones that I think is the most complicated is stimulus control, especially our internal dialogue. We all have ants. That's automatic negative thoughts. And those ants really do run around on our brain when we're trying to do something new and learn something, to develop something deeper. The self-critical messages that pop up can be pretty considerable. Thank you, Jerry. You put it in the chat space.
I was halfway there as Doris had a go as well, and I was halfway through it. So
got it. Any other questions or thoughts? And if you have one, while I have a few minutes left, by all means, interrupt me. I think the question of self-report tools, especially in the arena of emotional intelligence, is highly suspect for all kinds of reasons. We have lots of evidence that on smaller scales, 3-point, 5-point scales, people overrate themselves. It's everybody who studied this for the last 30, 40 years pretty much says the same thing. That when you look at these 3 or 4 or 5-point scales, we tend to think of ourselves as more empathetic than people experience us. We tend to think of ourselves as more interpersonally savvy than other people experience us. And I feel that while self-report tools are valuable to get into the person's image of themselves, um, as I said earlier, the newer evidence we have that a 7-point scale with clearly defined anchors enhances accuracy. And I'm hoping that we'll see more research go in that direction so that self-report tools will get a better, if you will, perspective on them within the larger professional community. Um,
We had a really interesting small example of that in John's session earlier, where he was asking us to rate ourselves as to how emotionally intelligent we were, and and the overall result was above average on a 5-point scale. So, and as he was saying, almost everybody who's asked about whether they're a better driver or not, it says yes, I'm much better than average as a driver, but of course they can't be. We can't be.
the other thing that I'm highly suspect on the self-report tools is the use of norms. Because if we generally, all of us say we're more empathetic than we really are, then our scores are being compared to people who think they're more empathetic than they really are. And so we wind up getting scores that are themselves inaccurate based on normative groups. So it's a sticky wicket. Doesn't mean they're useless, but in the hands of a talented interpreter, you can use it for inquiry purposes that help people get to a better sense of self and enhance their overall effectiveness. What I am clear about, though, is that the more we enhance our basic skills that you see in the list that you have in your hands, that the more likely it is that we'll be effective and be well in the way we do things. There was one other handout I forgot to mention earlier, and it's a handout that has to do with vertical development. You've got that handout. Just know it's there for your own reflection, your own thoughts, and your own taking a look at your internal meaning making system. I think Robert Kagan was on the money with his system about meaning making reference points, and I found over the years that that's quite helpful. Okay, John, then the last minute, you get the question.
Oh dear, I have several questions. Some are a bit techy, but some are less techy. So about norms and emotional intelligence questionnaires, I think you're absolutely right. I think norms work well with some questionnaires, but I think there may well be cultural differences. So if you're trying to use any emotional intelligence measure internationally, I think those cultural differences just really mess with how people answer those questions, and hence mess when you're doing normative comparisons, especially doing norm comparisons against, say, an American group, which is typically what you'd end up doing.
All right.
I think your questions about 7-point scales that's really interesting. I was wondering if there's a danger of having more of a central tendency response set. Can we just go to the middle? Or if have you got behavioral anchors for every question, which would help to draw one out?
Right. And you didn't see the behavioral anchors in this particular tool, but there was a lot of work that went into getting as precise as possible. Most 5-point systems go from, a single term like don't use or not applicable to effective. Well, that's not helpful. When people are trying to self-rate, they need more definition around each of those points so they can say, yeah, this is more likely where I fall. And most, especially Likert systems, do not do a good job of giving good anchor points, and that's an issue.
So you have separate behavioral anchors for each question, or I'll look at the measure.
Yeah. Thank you for the gift of your time, and I certainly hope that there was some things that prompted some questions, thoughts, and explorations for you. And if the fates allow, maybe we'll have the good fortune of having a chance to have a conversation in the real at some point in the future.
That would be great, Roger. Thank you so much for your contribution, and to everyone else as well. It's been a great session, and certainly I've got plenty to think about. There's a 15-minute gap just to mark your cards for the rest of or the next stage of the conference before the next session. So 4 o'clock, there's a hard choice to make between logging on to hear Vicky Jo Varner on values and coaching and type and EQ, or Elizabeth and Catherine Hirsch on leveraging personality to bring sanity to an insane world. Or you could come and just join us in the Zoom room for a chat. The link to that is pasted in the chat here. A couple of quick adverts. On April the 16th, if you're a member of BAPT, we have our AGM and exclusive members event when Sue Blair is going to be leading us thinking about how we use sensing and intuition to navigate the concrete and the complex. And on the website, you can see that event and also details of our emerging program for the coming year. And finally, for our face-to-face event this year, as you're probably aware, we're partnering with the Centre for Leadership in Copenhagen in Denmark. So we have lots of thought leaders in the type community booked in for that event, including Yvonne coming from the Myers-Briggs Foundation to talk about research, I think, and got people from Type Coach, Personality Hacker, and a great program for an amazing price. And Copenhagen is a lovely space to spend the weekend if you want to do that. So please stay and chat for a few moments if you'd like. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next session or elsewhere during the conference. So thank you.